If a virtue signalling championship of Australia were held today, I have no doubt White Ribbon would be among the leading contenders. Now, if you don't know who White Ribbon is, just go take a peek at their website and I think you'll get the White Ribbon message. On the homepage, they of course have their top priority, an Australian-wide campaign to stop men's violence against women. And they have some useful links there to investigate domestic violence, which provides some useful statistics like this. 1 in 3 women have experienced physical and/or sexual violence perpetrated by someone known to them. Interesting way of phrasing it, isn't it? Because you have to come up with these cherry-picked ways of presenting the facts if you want to perpetuate the narrative that women are the major victims of violence. You see, the fact is, this survey cited here, which is now out of date, there are updated numbers, shows that 4 in 10 women and 5 in 10 men are victims of violence in their lifetimes. But to make women the primary victims, you add the qualifier by someone they know, because men are more likely to experience violence by a stranger than someone they know. Still, 1 in 4 men are likely to experience violence by someone they know, but the women's have it worse at 1 in 3. And 1 in 3 men will experience violence from a stranger compared to 1 in 8 women. But that's not important. Stick to the narrative. And note, all these numbers are measured over a lifetime since the age of 15. I'll come back to why that's important a little later. Anyway, on Tuesday, White Ribbon had their virtue signalling bonanza attended by our weak-kneed Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull. But first, a reminder of what Talcum Malcolm thinks about the issue of domestic violence.
The issue of family violence, or domestic violence as it's often called, which is just violence against women.
So with that little reminder out of the way, the following should come as no surprise.
At this White Ribbon breakfast, I'll begin by recommitting myself to the White Ribbon Pledge. I will stand up, speak out and act to prevent men's violence against women. Not all disrespect of women leads to violence against women. But that, my friends, is where all violence against women begins. Not all disrespect of women ends with violence against women, but that's where all violence against women begins. Once that seed of disrespect is sown, it reproduces a shameful pattern where 3 in 10 Australian women will experience physical violence, 1 in 5 will experience sexual violence, and about 1 in 4 will experience violence from an intimate partner over their adult life. I want Australia to be known as a nation that respects women, and I want respect for women to be at the very heart of what it means to be an Australian. And remember how important it is to stop disrespect of women at the very start. As Lucy was the first person who I heard say this, and she's absolutely right. We all have an obligation, fathers and mothers, to bring up our sons and grandsons to respect all the women in their lives, right from the very start. Edmund Burke wrote that no one made a greater mistake than he who did nothing because he could only do little. So today I challenge all Australian men to think about what you will do to advance equality in your world, in your roles as fathers, sons, brothers, colleagues, mates, no matter how small an action it feels. A word to a nephew, a word to a grandson, that could change the direction of a life and keep women safe in the future.
And of course, Bill Shorten, the man that believes in nothing except virtue signalling, was not to be outdone.
If you look at the first, the ABS released the findings from the 2016 Personal Safety Survey. It was the first consolidated ABS data released on violence against women since the 2012 census. It recorded a 13% increase in partner violence against women. Last year, 211,000 Australian women experienced violence at the hands of a current or former partner. Let me put such a big number in numbers which are perhaps more manageable. If you divide that number by the number of days in the year, it means that from when we woke up this morning till tomorrow morning when we wake up, 578 assaults and attacks will be recorded. Or let's even put it in a more direct way. In the 1 hour of this function, 24 assaults, violence will be recorded. Or even let's just put it perhaps in the more mundane, although it is not actually mundane. We know that there are children waking up this morning who will be having breakfast in unfamiliar temporary accommodation, will be enrolling in schools that weren't the schools they go to, but they're no longer able to live in the house they used to live in. I am very sure that last night thousands of Australian kids will have been at home and they'll be wondering, Dad in a good mood tonight? Is the tension going to be there? Are the voices going to get raised? Will my headphones block out the noise? Will Mum be okay? The numbers aren't going in the direction which I believe the goodwill in this room would wish it to be.
Now, like most politicians, I suspect Bill Shorten is just reading out numbers that someone handed to him without knowing what he was talking about. You see, the 13% increase Bill refers to is the difference between the 1.5% of women that experienced partner violence in the last 12 months in the 2012 survey versus the 1.7% number in the most recent survey. But the ABS says this change is not statistically significant. You can see this directly in the spreadsheet. If a change is deemed statistically significant, it has a note attached to it denoted by a red flag. The numbers Shorten cites have no such flag. And if Bill were being consistent with his claim about a 13% increase in partner violence against women, then he might have pointed out that the increase for men was 33%. Also, by the way, not statistically significant. However, the ABS says on the front page of the most recent survey, the proportion of women who experienced partner violence in the previous 12 months has remained relatively stable over the last decade, whereas the proportion of men who experienced partner violence in the previous 12 months increased between 2005 and 2016. But that's not important. Remember, stick to the narrative.
The issue of family violence or domestic violence, as it's often called, which is just violence against women.
Also, all those numbers Shorten threw out, 211,000 women experienced violence in the last 12 months, well, also 114,000 men, 578 women in the last 24 hours, 312 men, 24 women in 1 hour, and 13 men. And they weren't all violent assaults, as Bill asserts. Some, not insignificant proportion, are threats of violence. Now juxtapose those statements from both the Prime Minister and the opposition leader with those of Senator David Leyonhjelm of the Liberal Democrats.
Just one last one. The major party leaders are attending a White Ribbon Day breakfast this morning. I guess just perhaps in light of emerging allegations surrounding characters like Don Burke, what's the significance of White Ribbon Day?
White Ribbon it's basically virtue signalling. I mean, I don't think there's a single person who's ever decided not to be violent against women because of a thing like White Ribbon. If you are violent against women, you're an evil bastard anyway, whether or not you wear a white ribbon. And if you do wear a white ribbon and you're not violent against women, violent towards women, then wearing a white ribbon's not going to change anything. I think it's bullshit.
The day doesn't have meaning for raising awareness? Or?
No. Violence against people, full stop, is bad. Not all women, not only women are victims of domestic violence, by the way. There's a fairly sizable minority of men who are victims of domestic violence too, both from women and from same-sex partners. So no, I think domestic violence should be treated as inherently bad, full stop. Wearing white ribbons doesn't change that.
Thank you.
Absolutely nailed it. Now, I said I would come back to this point about using data about violence prevalence over a lifetime, as White Ribbon does and Malcolm Turnbull did. Shorten was the only one, in my opinion, to use relevant statistics, but even then, he misrepresented them. So why do advocates consistently use the over a lifetime measure? Well, because it makes them look worse than they actually are. 1 in 3 women will experience violence from someone they know over a lifetime. But think about it. A 60-year-old woman that was slapped across the face in 1977 is included in that measure. But how does that tell you anything about the prevalence of violence today? If you want to get a picture of prevalence rates today, you would use the over the last 12 months measure. But you see, 1.7% of women having experienced some form of partner violence, of which a not insignificant chunk being threats of violence, is not as likely to raise eyebrows. Now, on the same day as the White Ribbon Virtue Signalling Fest, Senator Leyonhjelm hosted Milo at Parliament House, and I was lucky enough to get an invite to attend, and therefore I got to listen to this question from a clueless Fairfax journalist.
Milo, due to violence from the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, you talked earlier in your speech about how women essentially don't have anything left to complain about, and there's been a great victory with feminism. I'm just wondering what you make of the continued high rates of domestic violence and sexual assaults around the world. Obviously, Harvey Weinstein's brought that to the fore. We've had a breakfast this morning here at Parliament about domestic violence. 1 in 3 women over 15 years of age in Australia experience physical violence, 1 in 5 sexual violence. What's your response to that? Is that not something still worth fighting for?
Now, it may have been difficult to hear what she said over the alarm, but the first statistic she threw out was that 1 in 3 women have experienced physical violence since the age of 15 over their lifetimes. And this was in response to what Milo had said earlier about feminism having nothing left to fight for because they'd already achieved equality. So clueless is this journalist that she doesn't realise that this statistic from the most recent personal safety survey shows that 4 in 10 men also experience physical violence over their lifetimes. And this is her star statistic on what women have left to fight for, even though they already have it better than men. I bet she's not even aware of the number of males because that doesn't even enter the consciousness of people like Turnbull, Shorten, or your average misinformed Fairfax journalist that pushes the popular narrative. The irony in all this is that the greatest decrease in overall violence over the last decade, according to the ABS statistics, is violence against men. And that's because of a decrease in male-on-male violence. Now, I don't remember the government throwing hundreds of millions of dollars at a campaign to stop violence against men or telling men to respect each other more. And yet violence prevalence rates have come down by over 40%. However, we are in the process of spending those same amounts of money on campaigns to stop violence against women. If by the next survey in 2020 we haven't seen any meaningful reduction in violence against women, will politicians come forward and admit, as David Leyonhjelm suggests, that wearing a white ribbon doesn't do anything useful? Well, conveniently, I suspect a lot of them will have moved on by then, and so the narrative can be passed to the next generation of uninformed politicians. I'll see you next time.